This week on the Eldritch Lorecast.
Slicey the Draw Steel mascot.
Because if you go onto Reddit and you read the posts about like, I'm a new DM and I'm running for new players, what should I run? And people are like, I'll run Out of the Abyss. That's a good starter set. I'm like, yeah, that's a great starter adventure with 72 NPCs and the characters starting out as prisoners. And yeah, perfect.
There seems to be a bit of cynicism, dare I say, in the community around why the Bastion system is in the Dungeon Master's Guide if it's meant to be a player-facing system.
Why do you want the world to be living when the players are not there to experience it?
I always think about Indiana Jones. If he doesn't make the jump across the spike pit, it's not fun if he just falls on the spikes and dies.
All that and more right now.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the Eldritch Lorecast, the number 3 tabletop RPG podcast in all the realms. My name is Ben Byrne, and I am joined this week, as always, by Dael Kingsmill, Shawn Merwin, James Hake away this week. So filling in for our soothing baritone is Bob Worldbuilder. Bob, welcome to the Eldritch Lorecast. Thank you for making the time.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here, as always. But yeah.
As always, yeah. I can see folks in the chat all excited to have you here, which is awesome. And I do have a question for you. Rabdominalisis asks, on Spotify actually, if you could design the perfect Dungeons & Dragons mascot character, who would it be? Bonus points if you want to do a Draw Steel or a Daggerheart one instead.
I mean, it feels too basic just to go for a dragon. So in my head, I'm thinking like the two-parter kind of Halloween costume where there's like somebody in the back who's wearing like a dungeon door and somebody standing in front of them who's like the front legs of a dragon and like a dragon head coming out of it. That's interesting. 2-person mascot. I like it. I don't know.
And also the way you described it was some hideous beast birthed by a echidna. Like, yeah, really, really good stuff.
I'm just imagining that at Gen Con, it's somebody in one of those suits that has like air being blown into it to kind of fill it out, and it's the bricks around the door. It's perfect. Dael Kingsmill, coming in second there. What about yourself?
Dr. Cabrant in chat has a really fun idea. He says, or mimic, but I like the idea of, in Dark Souls, how you can get the sort of mimic hat that you wear that's just on your head. I love the idea of it being an adventurer with a mimic biting onto their head. That would be a really fun mascot. Or if I was to do a Draw Steel one, it's tricky because I feel like mascots kind of have to have like a cute quality. I'm thinking of like, I don't know, prefectures in Japan where they're like, we're known for leek. So we made a cute leek as our mascot. I'm thinking that kind of vibe. And that's a little tricky with something like Draw Steel. But maybe if it was like the Ram of Ajax, you could do something with that. Give it some big exaggerated angry eyebrows. Yeah.
Well, I was for Draw Steel, I'm imagining like almost like like the Clippy guy from Microsoft Word, except it's a half-drawn sword with eyes on the metal bit, and that's the Draw Steel mascot.
Yeah,
Slicey.
There we go.
Slicey,
we've done it.
Draw Steel mascot.
Looks like you need help attacking this.
Perfect. That's going to be in whatever the Draw Steel Dungeon Master's Guide, Game Master's Guide looks like.
J Pizza
it's got to have Slicey tooltips
gelatinous tube, which is correct.
Shawn Merwin, what about yourself? Which mascot are you designing?
So my first thought was from the old 80s cartoon, the Dungeon Master is sort of a mascot.
Good character.
Right, he's a little guy. And then I thought Chris Perkins is like the perfect mascot for D&D. He's been there for a long time. He's always running games, and then I thought of Flump, and I'm just saying that because Teos loves Flumps, and then when I saw the other two, my mind immediately went, as one would, to the old movie Mystery Men, like the weird superheroes movie.
Yes, I love that movie.
So D&D is Captain Amazing, right? It's the big thing that just ends up messing up and getting destroyed. But then Draw Steel is the bowler, because for me, Draw Steel is cool, but it's always just like knocking things in different directions. It's like you do this and then you like blast somebody four squares. And then I was trying to figure out what Daggerheart was. Daggerheart's like this, you roll and it's doom and it's destiny and it's all different sorts of things moving around at once. So Daggerheart's the Blue Raja from that franchise. Yeah. Focusing in on stuff and then throwing cutlery is my mascot for the three games.
Perfect.
I'm not sure Mystery Men would count as a franchise, but I wish it was. I wish it was.
You know who should be the D&D mascot, though, is what's that big fat dragon's name from the movie? Thunderchild. That's the one. That's who it should be. Love that guy.
DungeonsandDragonsFan.com, which is a blog website, posted a list of the 10 best D&D podcasts that are not actual plays, listing at number 1, you guessed it, the Sly Flourish Talk Show. But number 2, where it belongs, Mastering Dungeons. But number 3, as part of the Holy Trinity of D&D podcasts, the Eldritch Lorecast.
Okay.
Which was very humbling, very much appreciated. Made me feel part of the broader podcast community. Great entries across that list. I won't read them all out, but Total Party Thrill, 3 Black Halflings, Dungeon Master of None, Morris's Unofficial Tabletop RPG Talk, all great podcasts.
Does the combination of Shawn's placements mean that Shawn Moen is placed 5th?
No, I figured this out. I am 2/7 of the best podcast amalgam.
It's pretty good.
That's true. Are you the only host to appear repeatedly on that list?
I don't know.
Fair enough.
Well, the fact that you're twice in the top 10 3 is really, that's something. So
it shows a lack of standards in the role-playing game podcasting industry is really what it says, but we won't go into that.
And the flagellant goes over the back again.
It's an honor just to be nominated.
Indeed. We all know the truth in our hearts, but appreciate them making that list. Speaking of lists, the new Dungeon Master's Guide lists out a lot of things in it that you might want to use if you're running some tabletop RPGs. I've been flicking through this thing most recently, not in a lot of detail except for the Bastions. I read that whole chapter virtually last night. Not every single facility that you can put in a Bastion, but I read a handful of them. Has anybody else had a chance to look through any sort of sections, any thoughts, any opinions, any feels, any vibes?
Some of the basics part, like mostly I took just skimming different parts of it, but I really do like the inclusion of the half-page adventures. Just the fact that exists, at least. I haven't, are they awesome? I don't know. But that is so cool to me because I do think it's kind of a long-running thing with D&D that, not that, I don't know, different people need different amounts of information. It's kind of better to put more in your module, I guess, so you'll capture what everybody needs. But I do often feel like I'm left, doing the homework of, okay, how do I whittle this down into something that I am going to run at the table? And so seeing those half-page adventures in there is really nice. I like that.
I agree. I feel like similarly, having skimmed the start of the new DMG, chapter 1, the basics, 2, running the game, 3, the DM's toolbox, which we've talked about before from their promo about it being a toolbox of things that GMs can throw into the game and quickly grab. Chapter 4, creating adventures. Chapter 5, creating campaigns. I swear I'm not just listing off all the chapters, but those kind of feel like they're a staircase of ascending things that a new GM might want to know about, And hopefully, I would think after reading just chapter 1, you could run maybe like a short little adventure or something. But then if you want to get know more about running more complicated adventures, then you might read that chapter once you're ready to run a longer campaign, or your 2 or 3 adventures that you've run start snowballing into a longer campaign. It seems like I showed it to my wife briefly. She didn't like the cover art. She said it was just a splash of color. Everybody's got an opinion. But I showed her the chapter titles and I said, does this feel like, you could run a game based on this? And she was like, sure. Yeah, it feels like it might teach me how to run a game. So take that mild recommendation for what it is. Dael or Shawn, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah.
I'm pleased with it. I'm pleased with the focus on new DMs because I feel like Wizards has a responsibility to the industry as a whole to bring in new players and bring in new game masters. And they can't do that if they are putting advanced advice or advanced topics into this book that is supposed to tell you what the game is and how to run it. And I don't trust the community as a whole, myself included, because if you go onto Reddit and you read the posts about like, I'm a new DM and I'm running for new players, what should I run? And people are like, I'll run Out of the Abyss. That's a good starter set. I'm like, yeah, that's a great starter adventure with 72 NPCs and the characters starting out as prisoners. And yeah, perfect. Right. So it needed to be broken down. It needed to be put into the public consciousness, I think, as not the tool, but a tool. Because now you can read this, and if you're a learner who learns by reading, you've got it. If you're a learner who learns by many different sources, you can read that, then watch a video, and then watch an actual play, and you can start putting the pieces together because you have this blueprint. And that blueprint needs to be there.
I know we're going to get into this a little bit further down the run sheet, but there really is this ongoing difficulty for the Wizards team to decide what is the Dungeon Master's Guide for. Because clearly it is a guide for Dungeon Masters. We got that. We know that much. But what does that mean? You know what I mean? Like is it because the DM often is the more experienced player in the group, do you then cater to that crew of people who they get the rules, they understand the rules, now it's the more advanced stuff? Or do you cater to, hey, this is just a book of resources, a treasury of stuff that you can chuck in where you need it? Do you make it a guide for newbies like this one has? And it's kind of refreshing the idea of giving a Dungeon Master's Guide kind of a little, I don't know. It made me think of the how to. So you want to be a game master by Justin Alexander, which really builds up in each chapter. You know, first you need to know this, then you can know this, then you can know this, and just that ordering of it makes such a difference in an era where we are trying to cultivate more dungeon masters and trying to convert players into being dungeon masters. Wait, Bob, it was you in the comments last week who had a really good point about how having the 3 separate books, my soapbox is back, the 3 separate books can scare players away from being dungeon masters.
Yeah, well, not only that, I think the paradigm of a separate book for dungeon masters, and this also goes hand in hand with like the mystique around the game in the 80s, and the role of like, oh, the dungeon master, like, you know, it just sounds intimidating. And I think it was kind of meant to, because that drew some people in, but at the same time, it pushed many other people away. So I think for the last, 40 plus years, I guess, since the first like Dungeon Master's Guide, there's been kind of this too strong of a separation in the game that then makes people think like, oh, like I could never DM. Whereas like every other game that exists, like usually you don't have a person running it anyway. But I think the enforcement of like keeping this separate book for the person who's going to run the game instead of just having all the rules in one book, it just reinforces that idea.
I think the choice to make this book targeted very much at new GMs, which some people, Cobalt Press, have opinions on, I think it's ultimately a good choice for two reasons. First of all, it kind of does make it a little bit optional. If you are an experienced GM and you don't feel like you need the advice that's in this book, that's fine. Don't buy it. You know, there's plenty of magic item, especially now, especially with the advent of the wave of third parties that have come in over the course of the 2014 rule set. There's plenty of magic item books and monster books if you want that kind of toolbox style things in there. There's also a couple of toolbox style things in this book, such as the chapter, the DM's toolbox. There's the magic item section, obviously, the lore glossary, if you feel like you need that because you're running in the realms or Greyhawk or somewhere. And there's the Bastion system, which is its own topic, but it is kind of like a toolboxy thing that you can add on to your game if you want to. But I think it looks like it is trying to do a good job of on-ramping new GMs. And I think that new GMs coming to this book will have a really good sense of what is where, which was a real weakness of the previous DMG, where I used to flick through that thing as a new GM constantly and be like, oh, I know it was on this page somewhere.
Yeah.
Here somewhere. I'm terrible at checking table of contents.
Yeah. And if they don't come out with a good starter adventure, then A, they're missing an opportunity, but B, at least they have this here so people can pick up that a imperfect starter adventure and know how to work their way through it.
I'm glad you bring that up, because that's what I'm like really banking on. I'm just a big fan of the box sets, so I really hope that keep on the Borderlands, that they do it well, and that I don't know, that it introduces a whole new batch of people to that. But also, I do think that starter set is like the intro for many people. So that is kind of, like you said, they have a responsibility to get these core books right. I feel like that starter set is really crucial. And then that can be the bridge into the core as it's supposed to be.
An interesting discussion that we've touched on here that I want to crack open more, and that we talked about a little bit last week. But the way I'm going to introduce this is some interesting comments that we got both on YouTube and Spotify around specifically the Bastion system and its location in the Dungeon Master's Guide. There seems to be a bit of cynicism, dare I say, in the community around why the Bastion system is in the Dungeon Master's Guide if it's meant to be a player-facing system. And that cynicism being like, well, they want you to buy, players have to buy this extra book because it's got the rules for the players in there. What's this about? And with all love and respect to those people, it does create an interesting or gives insight into an interesting topic that Shawn and I have been talking about recently in relation to Grimhollow, which is what to put in the Grimhollow campaign guide and what to put in the Grimhollow player's guide. And our the best example we have is transformations. We went really back and forth about whether to put transformations in the campaign guide or the player's guide, because they are inherently intended to be an optional thing that GMs can introduce into the game as a storytelling device. They're not necessarily meant to be part of your sick build as you're creating your character. They can be if you want to play them that way, but that's not their intended use. But we put them in the player's guide ultimately because players are going to have to reference the material from transformations probably the most in terms of what features and flaws it gives their characters. However, this also created discussion where we're putting in a section in the player's guide for equipment and a section in the campaign guide for magic items. And equipment is specifically non-magical things that a player's character can purchase that could help them fight a monster. I can't think of a good example straight off the top of my head, but maybe like an oil to oil your blade that like makes specters weak. I think that went into the equipment section. But as we were coming up with the ideas for these objects, the differentiation between them was kind of, do we want players to assume they have access to this, or do we want this to be something the GM can introduce when they want? And I think putting the Bastions in the player's guide creates an expectation that a player can take a Bastion if they want, rather than leaving it into the hands of the GM to decide whether they want to put Bastions into the game or not. And the example I'll use for this is feats, which were an optional rule in the player's guide in the 2014 rules. But as we talked about on this podcast a year ago, maybe your first campaign, they were optional, and then nearly every other campaign, at least that I played, speaking for myself, players kind of assumed that they were part of the game, whether the GM wanted them or not. I don't have a question. How does thoughts?
Full stop.
I agree with your assessment there of like, since the transformations are going to be most referenced by players if they're in use, then yeah, I mean, and it's kind of depending on how many pages is it. Like, would it have been easy for something if it were in the campaign guide? Would it have been easy for the GM to like photocopy that or whatever, send it to their players or something so they can use it? So I like how you put it in the player guide, because they're the ones referencing it. And I don't know how big of a section it is, but at least for something like Bastions, which I don't know the page count off the top of my head, but I feel like it's a meaty enough thing that a player will need to reference that it feels weird to be in the GM guide, like even though it's optional. Because one other thing I'd add is that it's kind of like Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. I think that had a lot of labels on like different subclass things, like ask your GM before you use this. Like this isn't a given, but nonetheless, like everybody bought that book. That was players and GMs. So if anything, I guess that'd be my answer to cap my point. I feel like Bastions shouldn't have been in the core. It just should have been in some other supplement book.
It's just as an FYI, it's about 10 pages, I think.
Oh, only 10? Okay, that's not so bad.
That actually surprises me a little bit.
It is 20 pages.
Whoa!
Oh, really? Okay. I can't count.
Shawn
and the murder begins.
Now we're way over the line. Yeah.
20 pages back and front, or 20 pages, 20 pages?
Spreads.
From page 332 to page 353.
Okay. So,
Yeah,
okay.
10
all right.
spreads. That's what I meant. Yeah.
Yeah. Look, I feel like there are a lot of different elements coming into this, because there are things like, the page count. As Michael in chat is bringing up the page count and what role that plays. I think that tends to be a larger issue for third-party publishers who are doing physical publishing, compared to Wizards has a little bit more room to just make bigger books. They can kind of afford that in a bigger way, but it is still a consideration. I will just go ahead and say I'm as cynical as the next person. I love looking for little what's the capitalist angle on why they're doing this. I doubt they've put Bastions in the DMG to make players buy more books, because I doubt that there's enough drive in the player base for Bastions that they're going to go and buy a second book just to get Bastions. I just don't think that need is there. So I don't think that it will have been that kind of a tactic in decision making. I think that it will have been things like Bob is saying, if there's a big chunk of page count that's going to be dedicated to this, I'm coming at it from the other angle. I'm looking at it and going, it would be definitely weird to go to another book and flip through for, say, spells. You know, if your character spells were in another book and you had to flip through it, that would be really strange. So having a strongly tied to character thing be in another book is weird. But having said that, the spells need to be, I'm just thinking about if you've got a really big chunk of just character options, I guess I would rather that you make that space in the PHB for your feats and your spells than for the Bastions. But at the heart of it, for me, I think it keeps coming back to this idea of what do we mean when we talk about player facing? And I think it kind of is tied to what you were saying, Ben, where it's yes, this is something for the players that you want them to look at it and get excited at the possibility and be like, oh, cool, I can own a castle? Awesome, I'm going to get me some sick flying monkeys. But at the same time, if a DM wants to be able to kind of control the flow of those things, I understand that as well. So I guess I don't have an answer. I'm just telling you all the different areas of my thoughts. There you go. Useful and helpful.
I will just quickly say on the page count thing, in terms of how many pages can a company afford to put into a book? It's not just the manufacturing of the book itself, it's also shipping, because books are heavy. So if you add 20, 30 pages to a book, that can be a couple of 100 pages to a pallet. I don't know how much weight that is, but that can blow out your shipping costs massively. So it's more than a consideration of how much does it cost to manufacture the book. It's there's supply line issues there to think about as well.
If you had a Bastion with a warehouse, you could just put them all. I'm reading the closet section of the Bastion system.
Yes.
You can never have too many closets in your Bastion.
Wow.
It's really where I think we need to turn this discussion.
Well, this is the funny thing about Bastions, to slightly tweak the conversation and the topic a little bit to be a bit more reviewy, I suppose. They excite the hell out of me, and I did not expect them to whatsoever. I am really keen to introduce Bastions into my game. I don't know if they're balanced. I don't know how they're going to affect the game. I haven't had time to play test it. None of you have either, for the record. But I'm excited to see what it does to my campaign, and I'm already getting ideas about how to tweak the rules. Video coming to Ghostfire Gaming soon, the YouTube channel. I'm excited how to implement them narratively into my campaign. What each of the because basically you get your Bastion, it has 2 functionally useless rooms, but they're for role-playing is what they say. And then it has another 2 rooms that are what do they call them? Facilities. And those facilities can be a thing, and you have to have prerequisites to be able to craft certain facilities in your Bastion. So for example, if you want to create, I think it's an Arcanum or something like that, you have to have an arcane focus and be able to use it as part of your class. So they're you can gain I thought that you were going to, probably.
I thought it was going to be actual restrictions, not just be a sorcerer. I thought that there was going to be like, you have to go and collect things, but it's like, well,
Well, there are resource limits. Like it costs gold to be able to expand your bastion, expand the size of rooms and things like that. It's not a complicated system. And I think for that reason, some of the benefits it provides are a bit, it's like gain advantage on a history check while you're in your library in your bastion. And it's like, cast bless on me. It's virtually the same. Like, there's so many ways to get advantage or some benefit on a single ability check. Who really cares? But the narrative implication of, and we talked about it a bit last week, of like having your village in the Saga of the Seasons have bastions in it, or having a bastion in Curse of Strahd as you become part of the little Barovian village that's in the town, or having a bastion in Dragon Heist or whatever. The possibilities excite me, even if the system itself may be a bit limited or flawed.
No, this sort of thing has been around forever, so I'm glad to see it. I have the same trepidation as I did last week, which is what sort of power might characters gain from it, and was that thought about? And how are these expected to be used in the actual story of a campaign, as opposed to this cute little thing that you have over here that never actually sees the light of day, except to get advantage on your Arcana check?
I think they have thought of that just based on the design of the bastions. They've definitely tried to position these as something that you can narratively invest in your game. And I haven't read all the facilities, like I said, but I think the power of what you can do is definitely going to burgeon on the who cares, as opposed to the, oh no, there's something super powerful here.
Was just going to comment on the 5th level requirement, because that is one thing about Bastions I still just can't get behind, that it's just like at 5th level, now you can have a home base. Oh, and yeah, again, I don't remember how this exactly connected, but it's just because right now, like in the campaign I'm running, my characters are level 2 and they're spending a bunch of time in a city and they're staying at this inn. And like right now they have a good amount of money still. But like, the bill's kind of adding up here. So it'd actually be in their benefit to just like probably buy a little place of their own in this city. And like, can you just do that? It's one of these things where now that there's a rule for a home base
buy the
and you get
inn.
it at 5th level. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, but it's like, and this isn't a 5e campaign, and like we homebrew a lot anyway. So like, this isn't a thing that I would be worried about. But would a player reading this Bastion system, at 5th level, they can get a home base. So like, if they want one before 5th level, can they? Like, I don't know how that's addressed in the system, but I feel like it can create some confusion when you have those restrictions on it.
Yeah, I kind of agree. And also because, and I know some people in the comments last time we talked about it were like picking on whether it is the best example, but I think it is an example. Certainly the Trollskull, Trollskull Tavern, Manor, whatever it's called in Dragon Heist, is a worthwhile look at thing. My words are so good today. This is my punishment for making fun of Ben. It's a kind of good case study to look at when we're talking about these kinds of Bastion opportunities, because it is a pre-written adventure where you are explicitly given a thing, and you're given it not at 5th level, you're given it pretty much straight away. You have your one little thing, and then they're like, here, have your haunted tavern. And so, or manor or whatever. Again, I don't remember. But then you have to build up all this stuff in the background, and you can't really do anything with it. It's a little bit weird. So I don't know. It's already weird the way that it is currently, giving it to you straight away. But I agree that it would be similarly weird to make you wait until 5th level before you got something. So I don't know what to make of that.
I think with the way the rules are written, as someone who's been running D&D and now designing for D&D for the past 2-3 years, but running it for 6-7 years at this point, I look at these rules and I know exactly what I'm going to do to change them, right? Which the first one is probably remove the 5th level restriction, but not allow you to build facilities until your 5th level. But say you can buy and get those first little kind of rooms, your home base, if you will, where you can go back to and safely rest and regather your resources and whatever. So I think it's a system that, no, it's not overly complicated, but that means that it's inherently hackable. which a lot of folks, especially in the YouTube space, whether you're a creator or a fan, love hacking, 5e.
That's 5e's identity. We must continue in that tradition.
But that structure, that scaffolding is still there if you're a first-time GM. Let's assume the Bastion system's 5 years old and everybody knows how it works and how it's going to affect the campaign now. But if you're a first-time GM, you still don't. So you might still come into it and really run it rules as written because you don't know how it's going to interact with your campaign necessarily. So there's scaffolding there to help new GMs, but it's not I don't think the power that the facilities give you are so crazy. And again, I haven't read them all. I've read maybe a third of them. That it would be a problem if like the party got access to a facility at 3rd level or 4th level instead of 5th, strictly speaking. They do also gate. So you get your Bastion at 5th level. Then I think it's at 9th level, you get access to a bunch of new facilities that you didn't have access to previously. And then I think it's 14th level, they give you access to the last set of facilities that you didn't have access to previously. So there is gating on the power level, in quotation marks, of those facilities.
Could I interest you an advantage on 2 kinds of saving throws for 7 days?
Ooh, maybe.
Is that something that you would like 2nd level characters to have? I don't know. No, that's a 13th level Bastion facility. I can see, like you say, why having that sort of scaffolding there is important.
A question suddenly occurs. As someone who has not read the rules, this does seem like a valuable thing to ask. Much in the way that spells can be a 5th level spell, but that doesn't mean that you are a 5th level spellcaster. Are the Bastions levels tied to your level, or are they their own thing?
I am 99% sure it's tied to your level.
Yeah, it's your level. The Bastions don't have a level. Your Bastion doesn't have its own level.
Again,
it's
wow.
whatever.
Yeah.
Can you imagine? But they just create a 3rd separate way of measuring levels.
Yeah, 3rd level system.
4th, exhaustion.
Oh no!
I think the reluctance or the hesitancy or the skepticism with Bastions as well, though, is part of why they're optional. Like in terms of like how do they fit into a campaign? Well, they might not fit into your campaign. And in fact, to give credit where credit's due, they do say in the Bastion introduction section, Bastions work best in these types of campaigns where your party might go out an adventure and then return to their Bastion. I don't know if they say it explicitly, but it does kind of suggest that if you're Frodo going to destroy the ring and your whole adventure is like this massive journey and you're not coming home till the very end, I think we used this example last week, maybe Bastions aren't going to be super relevant to you. But if if you're part of a guild or a league or something like that, or you're part of a village, I'm already homebrewing like pirate ships or moving bastions are not a thing, but I'm already homebrewing that in my head about how I could make that a thing because I think it's a cool idea. Maybe Bastions will work in that context. So I think they're filled with possibility, even if they're imperfect.
I think, as Dael put it, that's a big part of 5e's identity.
It was a good closing statement, Ben.
Speaking of good closing statements, it's getting close to the closing end of the year. And so I just want to let folks know, we mentioned this earlier, the Eldritch Lorecast, we're going to go on a little break in December. There's still going to be weekly episodes every week, all through Christmas, all through New Year's. It just means that we're going to pre-record a couple of episodes. So I think our last live show is on the 9th of December at a guess off the top of my head. And then there'll still be live streams, but they'll all be pre-recorded until we come back at the start of January. So just letting folks know that. Look forward to the Ellies, hopefully, and all our fun end of year things. Was there anything else that I wanted to mention in that? I'm just quickly checking the run sheet. Oh yeah, get your emails in while you can, because obviously if we're doing pre-records, we're not going to be able to talk about the news. Hopefully nothing explosive happens over Christmas. But get your emails in. Bob, what's the email address?
Oh, I can tell you what that is right now. It's podcast@ghostfiregaming.com.
Oh,
flawless.
I've been waiting for this moment.
God.
Flawless victory. Get them in now.
Putting us to shame.
Michael in chat asking when the Ellies are going to be. To be confirmed, but possibly the episode of Christmas, like that week, probably. And we have some other exciting things planned as well. but I don't want to make promises in case things go sideways. And also, just while I'm talking about like little announcements, look what I got. It's a little beast. It's a little cute, great beast.
Is this why
From
the
the
question was about mascots?
No. That was just completely. But I guess he is a mascot. This is the great beast plushie dice bag. There's no dice in there currently. Right. He's adorable. He'll aberrate you and whisper into your ear terrible truths about the coming apocalypse that he's going to inflict on you. And he's adorable. This was with the recent Grim Hollow Kickstarter that we ran in October over spooky season. This is just one of the prototypes. I should say this is a prototype of one of the pledge rewards that you could get. Late pledges are still open if you think he's a little adorable little munchkin here. And he will destroy you and your whole family. So love him. Just thought I'd throw that out there. Speaking of throwing things out there, Tia threw an idea out there when they emailed the podcast. And Tia was asking about how to create a living world. Podcast at ghostfiregaming.com. A living world. How do you create a setting that feels real and continues to exist when the player characters are not around? And how can you judge that you've accomplished this during the campaign?
So, I specifically told Ben I thought I had a cool answer for this, so I'll just go first. Anyway.
Go for it.
This came up because this was something I feel like I recently did pretty well in my own campaign. Not to toot my own horn, but I was like, I haven't heard of anybody doing this. I'm sure it's been done. Everything's been done before. But basically, there's kind of two parts. One part of this is that I'm running this campaign such that time moves between our sessions. So during a session, a couple days could pass if the characters travel or whatever, but also in the 7 days between when we play, 7 days pass in the game world. So there's always kind of things happening. And recently I took advantage of that block of time because, and of course, part of this is having that time pass allows your NPCs to do things. Whereas sometimes it's almost comical how little time can pass in game if you don't have a thing like that happen over the course of a campaign. Anyway, and so basically what I did was just set up this scene based on things the characters had heard about, things that the players they knew about. They've interacted with I think one of these NPCs and heard some legends about another because one of these characters is essentially a monster in the world. And to keep it short, basically I had my player characters begin one of our sessions by just handing them each essentially a stat block with a name, a little description, and a want that this character that they're going to portray here for a half an hour or so. We did this. And so we kind of had a mini session where they were members of an enemy faction, basically trying to entreat with this chimera that the enemy faction was trying to ally with so they could use it against the party. And so my own player characters had to be trying to do this thing that would hurt them if they did it well, but they all just really enjoyed it. And so ultimately that's kind of the end of story. How do you judge it is after the fact, did the players have fun? And mine really did. So that's why I want to talk about that.
That's a really cool, effective way of I'm thinking when you play Mass Effect, particularly the first one, there's a weird cut in the early part of that game. And in fact, I think Dragon Age, the Veil Guard does this as well. I'm not sure if it does it later in the game. But there's just a scene from Saren's point of view where he gets real angry and throws some stuff around. And then you never see the game from his point of view ever again for the rest of the game. It's kind of weird that they had that one cutaway cutscene. But I've struggled how to do that in 5th edition because how do you not just make the players passive in that scene? Here's this thing that you're not here to witness, but it happens. And you've just given an excellent answer. That's such an amazing idea. I love it.
My question was answered by Bob perfectly. My question was, why do you want the world to be living when the players are not there to experience it? And there are a few ways to, if you want the world to be living, to bring them in. And Bob's answer was perfect, which is make them a part of that living world other than what their characters see. So it becomes an entertainment. It becomes a different version of the game. And it's not just you wanting your world to be something more than it really needs to be.
It reminds me in a lot of ways what you all were just talking about of in the MCDM Dusk campaign that I played in that Matt ran. There were little moments where after a session had wrapped up, he would be excited about stuff that had happened, and he would write a scene sometimes from the perspective of a bad guy or from an NPC we'd met that just kind of shows what happened immediately after that, or what were the bad guys doing at that point, or what happened to this NPC, and all these different little things sort of going on. And sometimes it really it worked to put a fire under. So it wasn't something that we were presented with like during the session that we had to sit through, but it was, hey guys, look what I wrote afterwards. And it's like the bad guy is coming after you immediately right now. And we're going, oh no, we have to go, but we're not in session, So it was kind of a really fun little thing to like get you juiced up right before the next session. And then, you teleport away just as the bad guy gets there and you go, oh, he was planning that. We saw it in the fiction. It's very alarming, but in a good way. Thrilling, that's the word. We've got DM Rawlings in chat, says that their hack for sort of creating this vibe of time moving, a living sort of location progress, is to add in progress elements into their description. So, for example, the city is building an aqueduct. And that's kind of a fun, almost video gamey, again, way of doing it, where it can just be every time you come back to this place, something has shifted just a little bit. And it doesn't have to come up every single time, but in order to indicate, hey, something has changed, time has moved on, you can just be like, oh, they've completed the aqueduct and, they're having an opening ceremony, or, you know what I mean? Like have some reference to that. And I think that's a really fun idea. I also think rumors, which is already something that a lot of people implement in their games. Rumors can be a really sort of fun, easy way to slip that in, because if you've got rumors happening, have, devise little rumors that have like, I don't know, 3-step progressions. Or they don't even have to be rumors, sounds mysterious, but it could just be, the last time they came in to talk to the magic shopkeeper, they were talking about how excited they are for the cruise they're going to go on. And then a couple trips back, you come back and they're not there. And you go, oh, because they're going on a cruise. It could be little bits and bobs like that. And of course, bits and bobs. But of course, I have to, look, I know I keep bringing it up, but in my will never exist dream version of the Dragon Heist campaign, a big part of that, like to answer Shawn's question, why do you want to do it? That's a good question to ask yourself. What am I trying to achieve with this? For me, I'm trying to achieve that sensation of over the course of a year, all these moving pieces in the city falling into play. The dominoes are being tipped. And I really like the idea of, in my games, offering choices to players, whether it be like a strict, A or B choice, or whether it's just like, hey, here's what's going on, you decide what to do. When they choose to do one thing, they can't do the other thing. I love doing that because A, it really makes the agency of the players obvious, and B, because it means that when they choose to do this thing over here, I can have, the machinations of the bad guys move in the other direction. I think that's another way of really getting that sense of a living world and the progress.
I feel like I've talked about this before, but in a video game context, playing The Witcher 2 does this particularly well, maybe even a little bit better than The Witcher 3, because it's less open world, it's a little bit more linear, or at least segmented, chaptered. But that game has a way of like, when you go off and do a quest, when you come back to the village, the situation might have completely changed. And so the world feels like it's moving around you. And it's part of, Shawn was asking me about dark fantasy earlier today. It's part of that dark fantasy vibe, which is like, the world doesn't revolve around you. You're not the most important person here. You're just a person making your way through the world, doing the best you can. And so having the world kind of revolve around the player characters when they're not on screen helps capture that feeling that the world is living and that you are simply part of it, not the reason it exists, which I think is good for the verisimilitude of a world.
Yeah.
And this is opposed to just quickly like Skyrim, where everybody just stands around picking their nose until you come back and talk to them, and they feel so very dead, you know?
Yeah, and a really easy way to do that, think of mercenary job boards. When your players go up, let's see what people need to be done. Oh, we can do this one quickly, and then we can come back for that one that is worth more money. They come back, the job is gone. Someone else took it. You know, it's those little things of there is only so much time, and you are choosing how to spend your time. I think is a
the monster ate the person who put up the job, you know, like they didn't kill the monster. Now the monster is
everyone's in morning clothes.
Keeps disappearing, and then the whole farm disappears.
Yeah, I'm going to give you the opposite end of that. There can be a lot of feel bad moments if you take this too far, because what you're saying to the player is, if you're not running a dark fantasy game, but you say, "Oh, you went off to save this person. Ha! This person died," and the characters who want to be heroes are going, "What are we supposed to do? Should all 6 of us go in different directions on 6 different?"
Sean is right. So Sean is always right.
It is great. You just have to time it carefully, and you have to massage it carefully. And what I think it's Apocalypse World does is they set up this idea of fronts, and the fronts are moves that the game master can make when something happens or something doesn't happen. And when you make these fronts, you grade them very carefully, so it's not just, okay, you didn't go rescue the farm, so the farmer's dead. It's, you didn't go rescue the farm, so a cow's gone. And then you didn't go rescue the farm, so the crop failed. Then you didn't go rescue the farm. So, and you space it out so it's not this snap of the finger and now the kingdom is crumbling around you. You put those steps in.
Yeah, Thanos has to collect the Infinity Stones before he can snap everyone. yeah, that makes sense. Well, and I suppose in a way it also comes back to that idea of, why are you doing this? What are you hoping to achieve? And keep thinking about that. Sorry, go ahead, Ben.
Well, on that note, and kind of speaking of Thanos as well, I think the NPCs, and this is why I think that players really should have a modicum of respect for the NPCs. Just saying I'm an NPC apologist, rather than just like, you know, here's Farrell McGuffins, and people call him, fart face McDougal brain, okay, is because the NPCs are the GM's opportunity to roleplay a character, particularly when you think of villains. And the villain, their job in the story is to lose, especially if you're playing heroic fantasy. But there's still opportunity in there to make decisions about what the party have done that allow the GM to roleplay even away from the table and be like, okay, so the party just slew this lieutenant. How is the villain going to react? Well, he could send another like army or whatever after them, and that could create another encounter. But he's meant to be pretty smart. So what he's going to do instead is set an ambush over here instead. You know, there's ways to do that can be unfun for the players, as Sean's mentioning, the villain going and burning down their bastion or whatever while the party aren't there. But there's ways to do that in a way that is fun and makes the villain feel like they're playing chess off screen against the party. And you gave me an idea before, Dael, when you talked about rumors. It's not just what the villain's doing, but how do the party's actions affect other people in the world? What if the party rocked into a village and they started hearing rumors about themselves? And they were like, oh, did you hear this? Like this big monster was at the next village over, and some dudes went in there and killed it and like paraded its skull into town. And that might not be what happened at all, but it still creates this mythos within the world around the player characters. Could be a fun thing to make them feel like they're changing the world. Speaking of changing the world, Felix left a question on Spotify, and it's changed my world because we're going to answer it right now. Felix's question being, actually, and this kind of ties into some of what we were saying last, how do you avoid, quote unquote, no fun consequences for high-risk moments of failure? How do you handle save or suck scenarios? The examples they give is getting caught in a prison escape. The result is like just get locked up again. Like that seems like the most obvious result of that. Or getting thrown off a cliff during a fight. and your character just dies because it's 1,000-foot drop. How do you kind of create ways that are interesting? Negotiating with a highly hostile NPC is the failure of a charisma check. Combat starts immediately and ends the role play. That doesn't feel particularly fun in a given situation. How do you avoid that? How do you make failure fun?
It's a really good question, right? Because I always think about Indiana Jones. If he doesn't make the jump across the spike pit, it's not fun if he just falls on the spikes and dies. That's not as fun or interesting or exciting as him holding on by just the tips of his fingers and having to figure out his way from there, right? But equally, if you and your TTRPG have a player jumping across a spike pit and they roll a nat 1, there's only so many chances you can give them to scrape their way out of that, right? Like maybe you can then say, okay, and now you're on the edge. But if they roll another nat 1, like it just keeps going. You know what I mean? And eventually they're going to be like, you're trying to save my life. We're done. But I do think you can get away with making it more than a single roll a lot of the time. And the other thing I will say, and maybe this will be an unpopular thought, but if we're talking about examples like bad guy throws you off over a cliff in the middle of combat, I kind of think those moments are fun moments. It's really hard in the sort of heat of the moment to remember to step away from the rules because those rules are kind of a lifeline. But I think those moments are some of the most fun to just be like, he threw like, I'm sorry, you made your grapple check. They succeeded. They did their special thing. They threw you over the cliff. And now we're going to go over and focus on these other players and we'll come back to you in a minute. Or just let it become a narrative thing where you can kind of give yourself a little bit of room to just think, what's the most fun thing that could happen in the story at this particular moment? Aragorn flies off the cliff with the warg. What's the most fun thing that could happen here? We just never see Aragorn again? That's wild. No, he Wile E. Coyotes into the river and he gets found by a horse. I don't know. We'll work it out later. But right in this moment, we focus on the other characters and their reaction to what happened.
I loved how Dael started by saying, well, I always think of Indiana Jones. Just as if Indiana Jones is some kind of like true, the north of the compass. But anyway,
the voice in my head,
my thought was actually my initial
old grumpy Harrison Ford or young?
Any
young grumpy Harrison Ford.
Right?
Young
Yeah,
grumpy.
gotcha. Fair enough.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry, Bob, go ahead.
Yeah, my initial thought was kind of how Dael ended that with like, if the question is about high risk failure, like the failure, like high risk, high reward, or the failure itself is this epic failure. So I hate to like answer the question with like, well, just do it anyway. But at the same time, I do think it's, if you're fighting on the edge of a cliff, the risk of fighting on the edge of that cliff. If you're negotiating with the highly hostile NPC, if the worst case scenario is that you fight them, that's what most of the rules are for anyway. Like that's kind of the exciting part too. And things like, what was the first one that I really, because getting caught in a prison escape. And like, I feel like the first thing you think of might be you get captured again. But honestly, it's like, okay, wait, no, they'll probably put us in some kind of like solitary, maybe next, like we have 1 week until we're being executed now. Like it just raises the stakes. Or, okay, now you're going to be transferred to this ultra max prison. But during that transfer, that's like that's the main chance now. Like, so there's always like a way to give you a new chance. But also, as Dael said, you can't keep giving those chances when the stakes are that high. I feel like failure should mean a failure at some point. So
between Dael, Bob, and the chat right now, it's going so well. I had written in my notes a literal cliffhanger, and somebody in there in chat wrote a literal cliffhanger. And then they're talking about Blades in the Dark, which is a Powered by the Apocalypse driven game, where they have the concept of clocks. And it's sort of what I was talking about when you have the graded versions of your fronts as things happen. A clock is the perfect way. You went over the cliff. Okay, you did grab on to a tree that was growing out of the side of this cliff, but you are not going to be able to hang on until at the start of your next turn, you're falling. Everyone, at the start of their next turn, they're falling. Now you are moving the plot forward. You are making it exciting. It's not a instant death, but it is an impending death. And yeah, all of that and more.
And I would really second what Shawn just said, like stating the stakes out loud for everyone to hear with that timer, like next round, this is happening. Mm-hmm. That's the best way to handle it, I think, so that everyone is on the same page and knows exactly what they're up against. So yeah, that'd be huge recommendation.
And it hits so many of those points that we're talking about, right? Because it focuses on the reaction of the other players. It makes it so that you're not putting the hands of the story entirely into the fate of the dice. You know what I mean? It's spreading it across the roles of a bunch of different people. They can choose what they're doing. They have time to act. And so it's not down to part of the reason why high stakes situations are tricky in a D20 fantasy scenario is that a D20, when you're in really high stakes, you're really only interested in very good results or very bad results. But what happens when you roll like a 9 or an 11? Right? Like, what do you do in that scenario? That's really weird. But when you take it and you put it in the hands of the other players like that, you get to control a little bit of that emergent narrative. Because the dice don't know that you're telling a story, but the players do. So very, very good and valuable advice.
I think there's also ways to mitigate the failure to try to make it more fun, but not feel like you're pulling back on the consequences necessarily. I did really like the Aragorn example going off a cliff. I had a character die in a campaign years ago because literally they got pulled. I might have even put this example in the question. I can't remember, but they got pulled off the side of a cliff because they were fighting flying bat vampire creatures and just dropped. And I gave them a few opportunities to not get dropped. But then in the end, I was just like, well, if I keep pulling my punches here, it's going to become more obvious. And that character death really affected the campaign. It actually affected the players because they'd running a dark fantasy campaign as I do, they had already lost characters before. And so they were like, oh man, we have to like go through another loss. I don't know if we can go through this again. What I should have done if the player was up for it is the Aragorn went over a cliff. He'll be back. He's no longer in this encounter. Hey, do you want to run some of these minions so you're involved in the rest of this session? But he actually survived the fall miraculously. Maybe he caught, and it creates that sense of like, maybe the other players don't even know that until next session. But there's things that you can do that still feel consequential for having gotten dropped, such as, not to sound like I'm sort of tooting our own horn again, give them a grievous wound or give them a permanent wound. I had a character die pretty quickly after the player had already replaced the character, and he was like, oh, I've only just started playing this dude. I was like, all right, he lost his arm instead in that fireball blast instead of it killing him. So he was an artificer. He ended up building himself a new arm over the rest of the campaign. Falling in a spike pit, you get a grievous wound. Or, as Dael, you said before with the prison thing, the story's moving forward even though you're captured again because it's giving you a new circumstance, a new opportunity to push the story forward rather than it just being a repeat of what's already happened.
Just as Indiana Jones would do.
Just as Indiana Jones would do. What would Indy do? And I think you can keep looking for tools from other games as well. Like someone just brought up a Devil's Bargain from Mark Humes' games in chat. And it makes me think of, Dread. If you've got a player who is on their last thread, hey, you're about to fall into that spike pit, Indy. What you're going to do, you can offer them something. You can say, hey, in this moment, I'm going to offer you a Devil's Bargain. You will live, 100% guarantee. But the situation for the whole party is about to get more complicated, about to get a little bit worse. But you, for this moment, will pull yourself up out of that spike pit. Offer that to the player. And that works better in different scenarios with different groups of people. Sometimes you'll get a group of people who are just too loyal and they'll never do that to their friends, even though it would be better for the story. I don't know. Just keep thinking about the group and the genre and all those things as we always recommend. It's like maybe in your game, Aragorn doesn't survive the fall off the cliff. But it's still worthwhile to have that moment of like, we're going to focus on the reactions of everyone else. Then later on, as we keep that tension up, what happened, later on they can find his corpse. You know what I mean? Like we can just play in that zone of tension for a while so that when you release it, you have a little bit more control over how it releases.
There is always the group or the players that are like, Aragorn just got dropped off the cliff and they're like, oh, but he's +1 sword. Can we at least have caught that before he went over the cliff?
The keys to a Bastion.
Yeah, exactly. Speaking of the keys to Bastions, Bob, if folk had the key to your YouTube channel, what would that be? Where would they find it? Yes, that was I don't mean the password to your like back analytics or anything. I mean
the URL.
If they wanted to go and watch. Yeah.
Although if you do
yeah, it's just Bob World Builder. Anywhere you want to look me up. That's it.
I appreciate a video you put up relatively recently about getting back to basics. Do you feel, we've talked about this on the Lorecast a little bit before, about the YouTube meta of like the tabletop RPG space and how particularly, I don't know, in January 2023 for some reason, things got a little heated and then kind of stayed that way. And it felt like a lot of channels that were kind of, yeah, exactly. And a lot of channels, to be fair, us included, who might do more sort of content like we've been doing over this episode, which is like how to run your game, really morphed into how to be angry at certain people or here's the latest contract or whatever it happens to be. Do you feel like that's starting to come down now, or do you think the meta's changed permanently? Are you feeling that you want to shift back to the kind of back to basics style stuff?
Well, with a couple questions there, personally, I feel like it has changed for the foreseeable future, where that's just like a path that some channels, like that is a kind of channel you can have now. And that will probably work in perpetuity because I imagine companies will continue to do things worth a shock face thumbnail about. But at the same time, I do think most other channels, and I'm seeing like, I watch a lot of like small channels as well. And when like new channels are cropping up, it's like they don't have any of this baggage.
So many
so it's yeah. But it's cool. So I think so part of it's going to be that natural like turnover of like, I'm sure the big creators have shifted probably like 3 or 4 times in the span of like DnD YouTube. I'm sure that'll happen again. So I think down the line, ultimately, it's going to get back toward everybody's going to shift back a little bit toward the basics, but there will always be that side of it because it is successful. So, and I don't see a reason that it would stop being successful.
Well, go check out Bob World Builder if you aren't already. Bob, I feel like, not to preach at you, I feel like you need to get over at the Blue Sky party because I went and looked at you.
I do. Yeah,
and Dael as well.
I'm technically on Blue Sky. I just keep forgetting to post. I butterflied something this morning. I don't know what the words. I need the terminology.
Yeah. I'm not even there yet, but I feel like in the last 2 weeks, I've seen tons of people now sharing their profiles and everything. So it's like, okay, I think it's time. I'm just like hesitant to start another social media account because honestly,
that's fair.
Here's the inside scoop. Like pre-YouTube, I had like no social media whatsoever. Like I just don't use it at all personally. So it's really just for this. And Twitter really became a thing that I do just use more for fun. So then it's like, okay, do I need to replace it? But I feel like I should. So
that's fair. Yeah, I'm kind of the same with my Instagram account, and to be honest, my Blue Sky, which DM Rolling's asking in chat, it's the same. It's thebenburn.bsky. Whatever the URL is, but it's the same handle. Same as my Instagram, and it is just for fun. You know, it's like upload miniatures and that I've painted and stuff like that. I tried to do some real quote unquote journalism this week. I was trying to find if there's like actual analytics around the exodus off of Twitter, because it does feel like that's the case. It's also very possible that's just my echo chamber is starting to leave Twitter, but it's not in any significant numbers that would matter to the platform. But it definitely feels like the tabletop RPG party has converted across to Blue Sky, at least for the time being.
I've gotten over 1,000 new followers since a random Tuesday at the beginning of November. Whatever happened back then.
Who could say?
Yeah, weird.
Yeah.
Just weird.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, speaking of random occurrences, this podcast is not a random occurrence because it's here every week, streaming on Twitch, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 4 p.m. Pacific on a Monday, and it's Tuesday, 10 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. We'll be back next week, streaming then. So come hang out. You can also, if you're on YouTube, if you're on Spotify, where you're going before you go off and click onto Bob Worldbuilder's channel, give this video a like, stars, comments. Love the comments on Spotify. Love them on YouTube as well. Love them anywhere. Just throw us a comment. Why not? You got time. Unless you're driving somewhere, as we visited last week. Anyway, my name's Ben Byrne, here with Dael Kingsmill, Shawn Merwin, Bob Worldbuilder, and we will be back next week with another episode of the Eldritch Lorecast. I feel like we're all like looking at each other whenever
We're like,
it comes up to see, are they going to do it?
doing it? Do we wait? Do we do it now?
Do we pull the trigger?
I did it at the end of the previous podcast because I got confused.
Yeah. You introduced it as the Eldritch Lorecast.
Yeah.
You said, welcome to this week's episode of the Eldritch Lorecast when we recorded Mastering Dungeons. I thought that was hilarious.
It happens.